and he put on a wonderful act. He's a very good actor. He was enthusiastic describing the pictures that he had not only made but were in production, how wonderful they were going to be. And then he began to talk, directing himself to me, that I had this picture and the other and so forth in the production, and they were going to be great and so forth. So the old man was sitting there weakly, and finally he said, well, I am behind, I'm behind you 100%, and I am behind Rachel at 110%, and went off. So after the whole thing was over, Brett sent for me to come into his office, and he was furious. He was red in the face, and he said, why did you back me up? And I said, what do you mean, back you up? He said, why did you back me up about those pictures? I said, because you're a liar. There were no pictures like that, you know that. And he said, what do you mean I'm a liar? And he reached over and he took one of those spikes that you put papers on. Right. He reached over and picked this up, at which point I realized he was crazy. So I actually ran out of his office. I expected him to come and stab me with this thing. Ran into my office, got my hat and coat, said goodbye to Ray Kelly, and went. I went to the office, and I tried to tell the office manager there that Bert was actually crazy. That he was talking about pictures that were in the. He said, I don't want to hear it. We don't want malcontents here. I'm glad you're quitting. The contract's void. We'll send you a check when you give us a Hollywood address and go.
Then you went right to Disney. This is...
Yeah. I went to Disney's. And several months later, Brett got violent. He attacked somebody, and they put him in an institution. And he was there for several years. And then he came out, and Walt gave him a job. He allowed him to direct one picture. But, see, he had this crazy thing about changing things. So the picture went on and on and on, and finally Walt dropped him.
Did Bert do Tunaville Trolley?
I think he did, yeah.
I
think so. Yeah.
What's the best? Did anything good come out of Van Buren?
No.
Even the Aesop's Fables there, you always felt like you wanted to take a foot and kick the characters to move a little more.
Yeah. No, that was a schlock house.
After Disney, you went. Where did you go?
After Disney, I went to Max's and I worked on Gulliver and Mr. Bug Goes to Town, and that took the 2 years I had the contract with him. And incidentally, I found out why I got sick. The reason I left Walt is I got sick. I did my work on Fox and the Cat and Pinocchio with my arm in a sling, and at the end of the day, I couldn't put my coat on by myself. I couldn't pick my arm up to do it. So I was quite sick. So my doctor said I shouldn't stay in a climate where there was such a change, that it was warm in the day and cold at night. He said, couldn't you go somewhere else like Florida? I said, of course I could go to Florida. Yes, I could work. He said, go, or you're going to die in 6 months of exhausted, because it was very painful. So I went down to work down there, and I've been there a couple of months, and gee, I haven't been to a dentist in about a year. So I found a dentist, and he insisted on taking x-rays, and I said, I have no fillings, I have nothing wrong with my teeth, I just want them scraped. And that's, he said, no, I take x-rays. Well, he took some x-rays, and he came storming out of the developing room saying, you are being poisoned, look at this. And he showed me a picture of tooth here, an ulcerated jawbone with a huge hollow eaten out of it. That's why I got sick. I had this thing, no pain or anything, but it was killing me.
Time to change climate. This is then you moved to and then you moved to back. Where was the Fleischer studio at this point?
In Miami.
In Miami.
No, I stayed the whole 2 years, although I hated it. I didn't want to stay there, but I did my work. I'm a Victorian. When I sign my name to something, I do it.
This is also the point where the Fleischers were about to be leaving the business. They lost the Paramount studio after this.
Yeah. Well, see, what was happening is they had fallen in love with one of the inkers, passionately in love. And in fact, there must have been a real love match, because they were together till he died, maybe 30 years later. But of course, for a Jewish family, wow, what a scandal. You know? So the whole family was against him. And I guess that is how they ended up.
You were the director of Mr. Bugs Goes to Town also.
I was one of the directors, yeah. A sequence director.
How about one of the least talked about characters, Hunky and Spunky? You did A Kick in Time.
I did one picture with that. It was all right. The trouble was the stories were bad. Betty Boop, for example, did not progress as a character beyond what they had done with the very first movie with her. The story department was inept. There were many of them ex-animators and so forth. The only story writers who were any good were the fellows that they imported from Hollywood. But after doing those features, they all went back to Hollywood.
So coming from Disney and going back to Fleischer and going back to an unorganized group of people?
Terrible. Walt Disney had every animator of any status at all had a moviola. I could run his own pencil test. It took a lot of doing for the boys to convince Max he should have a pencil test at all. And he had one moviola in the whole studio, 750 people, one moviola. And if you wanted to see something, you had to wait your turn. You know? It was really chaos.
That is, the studio, Fleischer Studio, closed, and you left and went to to Warner Brothers.
It didn't close.
You left eventually. Went to Warner.
They moved it back to New York. Paramount took it over and became Famous Studios. So I went broke in 1958. It's in my book how I went broke. But I went broke, and
is this when you had your own studio?
Yeah, I had two studios. I had one in New York and one in Hollywood. A big macher. You know. It really wasn't what I wanted to do. I got pushed and pushed into being a businessman with a briefcase.
This is to get into TV production then.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, because that's my next one, but you went to two other studios before you started your own. There was Warner Brothers with Inky and the Minor Bird.
Yeah. And see, while I was at Max's, I had a father-in-law who was a colonel in the Army. And one time he took me, I went to Washington to visit him, and he took me to the animation department of the Signal Corps. And my God, they were using angle iron camera frames, you know. There was a box sitting up on top like this. I couldn't truck or move or pan or anything. It was like J.R. Bray had when I was 16.
It was probably Bray's equipment.
So he told me that, you know, and he said to me, well, if it's so bad, you know, there's going to be a war, why don't you do something to show them how to use animation? Well, I wish he hadn't said it, because I then invested about $5,000-6,000, which in those days was a fortune, and a lot of work. I worked sometimes 100 hours a week or more. And I made a picture called The Battle of Chancellorsville, Now, the Battle of Chancellorsville was in the Civil War, but it was a battle of movement, cavalry moves and so forth, and it was near to a blitzkrieg than even anything in World War I, which was in trenches, immovable. You know? So I made this movie, which was an instructional movie showing how various Army Corps moved, you know, what happened to them. And it was like no other movie that had ever been made before. It really was an instructional movie. The battle was 3 days, and after you saw this, you understood very well. But to read it in a book, it was such a complication. So it was a very good example of what you could do with animation.
Was Capra at the studio at this time, too?
Capra was doing his own thing, wasn't even in the Army yet. So anyhow, I brought this in triumph up to Washington, and I tried to show it to this Momsa that was running the animation department, this terrible man. He had already been seduced by MGM and Disney and all. They had wined him and dined him and dazzled him with all kinds of things, and apparently he took money, you know. So when I came, I finally managed to get a screening with a whole bunch of engineers from a nearby Army camp and this idiot. And so when the picture ran and the lights came on, there was thunderous applause until he stood up with a sour face. Then they all stopped, Army style, you know. And he started to walk out. So I pursued him up the aisle. I said, "What did you think of it?" He said, "We never use color. It hurts the men's eyes." And off he went. Well, I stayed in Washington almost a year trying to sell this idea, but I kept running into these 5%ers, you know. They wanted some bakshish, and I wouldn't give anybody a dime, being noble and naive, you know. So finally I gave it up, and I went back to Hollywood very disgruntled. So I went to Warner Brothers because Chuck Jones had told me it was fun to work there, and besides they were about to do Navy work. So I saw old Schlesinger, excuse me, and I told Schlesinger that I had the only person in the whole animation business who had any experience in doing training film. So I wanted to direct some, and I heard that he was going to do so. He said, "Of course I am. So why don't you work with Chuck Jones doing some animation until we get this work?" And I said, "Fine." So I worked with Chuck, with an old friend of mine, and we did the Inky job and so forth.
Inky and the Mighty Bird.
Inky and the Mighty Bird. That was
nice movements in that one.
Great fun, great fun. But then I found out that there was a Navy picture that was being done sub rosa. So I went in to talk to old Schlesinger.
Want to stop for a bit, or are we going?
No, that's all right. I'll just take a little coffee. And he said to me, "You know, you're such an inspiration as an animator to those boys in Chuck's unit that I just didn't have the heart to take you out of there." And I said, "Well, you know, you can take your job and you know what to do with it," and walked out. And about a half an hour later, I had a job over at the Lance Studio. All I had to do was pick up a phone, you know. So I worked for Lance throughout the whole war. It was a very nice experience.
Did you work on Woody Woodpecker?
Oh, yeah. Woody Woodpecker and a whole lot of jazz shorts. So I was a kind of a snobbish violinist, and I thought that jazz was garbage. And so I suddenly, Walt had me come into his office, and he said, "The first job you're going to do is this jazz picture." And he said some Me Lux Lewis or somebody like that. I never heard of him. You know. So I was in a panic. I immediately called up this friend of mine who was a jazz buff and had a lot of records and books. And I went over to his place and I read the whole weekend and had records and so forth. And Monday I had a vague knowledge of what jazz was about. But I learned to love it. You know, I like boogie especially. Not this new jazz, this amorphous stuff that they play, but old-time jazz I love very much. So I had quite a good experience there at Waltz. But I wanted to start my own studio.
Did TV help you make that start now?
Yeah, well, a funny thing happened. You know, Max knew I had a lot of talent. We didn't agree on the weather, nothing, you know. But he figured I must have something. So he asked me during the Mr. Bug time if I would do a series of lectures on acting, because he vaguely knew that acting wasn't all that good. So I ran some of the old shorts, and I showed them what was wrong with them, how somebody reached with this hand when it should have been that, you know, all these fundamental things about pantomime and acting. So one of the kids in the audience later married the daughter of an advertising man. And so when television came, he remembered how I had talked to the bunch, and so I seemed very knowledgeable. So he told his father-in-law about it. And the father-in-law called me up and he said, "Could you do a television spot?" I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know what spot was. So he explained it was a 1-minute advertising movie. And I said, "Oh, sure, I can do that." So he said, "How much?" So I thought, $5,000. Well, I didn't realize they were buying animation in New York City at the time for $1,000, even less, $1,000 a minute. So this was a lot of money, but I got Grim Natwick, Arthur Babbitt, and I to do the animation on this thing. It was 3 elves for Ajax.
And it became a hit around the country.
Oh boy, did it! I didn't know it though. I sent them the picture. They sent me a check, and then there was silence. So I was dying. There was no animation. There were no jobs around. There were no television out in Hollywood. They had, if you don't look at it, it'll go away. That's what they thought. So I decided I would go to New York and see what was going on. Maybe there was another Ajax to do. Who knew? So, I made a venture into the educational business and lost all my money. So I was absolutely broke. So I borrowed $300 from my mother-in-law, and my wife at that time and I went to New York with a print of the Ajax thing. When I went to the agency, I'd never been in an agency. I told them I had done this Ajax thing. They would call the whole mob, all the people to look at this. Usually they had a projector in the shipping department on a lot of boxes. So they show the picture against the wall. It didn't even have a screen. And everyone marveled and gave me work. So I got before I knew it, I had $160,000 worth of work.